Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, partners, friends, colleagues, and distinguished guests. It is a great honor to welcome you on behalf of Justice for Journalists Foundation to the second UK Media Freedom Forum convened at City St George University of London. Over the next 2 days, united by a shared commitment to defend and advance media freedom at a pivotal moment in history, we will engage with some of the most pressing challenges facing journalism and information environment, from transnational repression and legal intimidation to strategic lawsuits against public participation, to misinformation, disinformation, and media literacy. Media freedom is not just a professional concern for us. It is essential to the functioning of open, accountable, and democratic societies. Yet the environment in which journalists operate grows even more hostile and complex with every new day. Authoritarian tactics increasingly cross borders. Digital threats evolve with technology, and information ecosystems are strained by both political intervention, military attacks, and technological disruption. This forum brings together journalists, policymakers, civil society actors, legal experts, academics, and media defenders from across the globe. These 2 days, the experts will not only diagnose problems, they will explore practical solutions, share innovative approaches, and collaborate on strategies to protect journalists and uphold the fundamental right to freedom of expression. Keeping in mind the UK co-chair role of the Media Freedom Coalition, this is a moment to reflect on collective accountability and the meaningful actions needed to close the gap between commitments and delivery, which we will do by zooming into the local context and examining global initiatives at multilateral fora, such as the United Nations, OSCE, and Council of Europe. We're grateful to our partners and co-organizers of this forum, the Foreign Policy Center and the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, as well as the university that is kindly hosting us these 2 days, and other supporting organizations, for making this forum possible and for anchoring our discussion in both rigorous analysis and a deep respect for media workers worldwide. Thank you for being here, for your engagement, and for your dedication to defending media freedom. With that, I am delighted to officially open the UK Media Freedom Forum 2026 and pass the floor to our distinguished keynote speaker, human rights lawyer, Caoilfhionn Gallagher. Caoilfhionn, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, everyone. Hoping the technology works. Great. I wanted just in the brief time that I've got about 10 minutes, just to talk about 3 ways in which journalists bear witness and the resilience of journalists, and 3 quite different examples of issues arising. So first of all, I don't think the video is working, but I wanted to just tell you about this, and you can watch it in your own time. I'm not sure how many people heard this when there was an exchange between Niall Stanage, so an Irish-American journalist for The Hill in Washington, D.C., from Belfast, asking a question of Caroline Levitt on the 15th of January. Did anyone hear it? He asks a question challenging the suggestion that ICE was handling things well and had everything under control, on the basis that 32 people died in ICE custody in the US last year, and there'd just been a fatal shooting, and so on. And Caroline Levitt called him a left-wing activist and suggested that he wasn't a real journalist because he wasn't towing the administration's line. And that's a good example of one of the ways in which journalists are being undermined, but which we often forget about because we think about the high-profile cases and we don't think about some of those pernicious ways which make it harder and harder for journalists to do their jobs. Now, much of what we've seen in relation to female journalists, for example, in the US, in the last number of months has been very worrying too. So referring to journalists, female journalists, in a misogynistic, derogatory way, for example, and all of it makes it a hostile environment in which it's more and more difficult to do your job. So although I'm going to talk about some of the bigger headline-grabbing examples, I think it's very important that we remember that every time you have a political leader or a press secretary or someone who works for an administration or a government, a Western government, using language which denigrates journalists or undermines journalists' ability to do their jobs, that not only makes it problematic in the country itself, it also feeds this idea that journalism is fair game, that journalists are fair game. And we then see that language being echoed by autocratic regimes around the world. So put simply, if someone in a Western country calls a journalist an enemy of the people, it is not a surprise when you then see that language being echoed elsewhere in autocratic regimes and dictatorships. And we must remember the small examples as well as remembering the headline-grabbing examples. Second theme that I wanted to touch on is the targeting of editors and publishers. Now, this is a very worrying trend which I'm seeing in my work, and I've given you 3 examples here of 3 of my clients. Jimmy Lai, on the right, a British national, aged 78, currently risking dying in prison in Hong Kong for being a journalist and for being a pro-democracy activist. In the middle, Jose Ruben Zamora, who founded El Periodico in Guatemala, a brilliant newspaper which spoke truth to power. And he has recently, I'm pleased to say, got out from prison, but he's still under house arrest and facing charges related to his journalism. And then lastly, Maria Ressa, my client in the Philippines, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021. And Maria, although she's currently free, and I'm not quite sure where she is at the moment, I think she's in the US, she still has a jail term of over 6 years hanging over her head for being a journalist. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to mention these 3 individuals is that we've seen for many years autocratic regimes targeting individual journalists and trying to take them out or to silence them. The reason these 3 people are particularly important is because they are all founders and editors and publishers of media organizations which in themselves challenge regimes. So Jimmy Lai founded Apple Daily, a brilliant newspaper in Hong Kong, which was founded in the wake of Tiananmen Square in 1989, because so horrified was Jimmy Lai by what he saw unfold in Tiananmen Square that he felt he needed to ensure that there was a means of getting information to people. And he founded a brash tabloid which presented information. The gossip was on the same pages as the politics, and it meant people quite often bought it for the gossip and then read the politics. So really brave thing which really shook up the media environment in Hong Kong when it came out in the 1990s. And the printing presses of Apple Daily have long since closed, and long before the sham national security law trial ground to a halt recently, the paper had stopped. The printing presses were literally sold off in a fire sale, and that's part and parcel of the reason why Jimmy Lai was targeted. It's partly to send a message to any young journalist in Hong Kong. If they can go after the biggest fish of all, it sends quite the message to the small fry, and it sends a chilling message to anyone who might dare to do independent investigative journalism in Hong Kong. If they can take out Jimmy Lai, they can take out anyone. The same tactic was pursued in Guatemala with Jose Ruben Zamora, and the same tactic was pursued with Maria in the Philippines. So Apple Daily, El Periodico, and Rappler, Maria Ressa's organization in Guatemala, it's all part of that same tactic. Another case in the same vein, which doesn't get enough attention at all, and I know will be mentioned later today, this is Zia Ahmed Lobeli. Zia turned 50 while in prison for being a journalist in Georgia. And she, again, is someone who founded and is a publisher of Net Gazzetti and Batum Levy, 2 brilliant media organizations which speak truth to power in Georgia. And make no mistake, that is why she's in prison. She's been in prison since January 2025, for over a year. This case is not getting enough attention. One of the reasons it needs more attention here in London is because many people who run the autocratic Georgian Dream government in Georgia have UK property and UK interests. And we have mechanisms which mean we can hold them to account, and we have real leverage to hold them to account for what they're doing to Zia and what they're doing to student protesters in Georgia simply for speaking truth to power. So those 4 cases are indicative of a very important trend. It's essentially attempts in all of those countries, in Hong Kong, in Guatemala, in the Philippines, and in Georgia, to take out a media ecosystem. Why take out 1 individual journalist or 5 individual journalists when in one fell swoop you can shut down the most brave, brilliant, independent media outlet, and you can take out the publisher? That's what these cases are about and why they deserve particular attention. And then lastly, I just wanted to turn to the issue of journalist deaths. Given that time is very short, and I know some of you will have heard from the brilliant Jodie Ginsberg, the CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists last night, and I know this topic will be coming up again later. I just wanted to touch on this because I didn't feel I could be standing in front of you without referring to this. I'm on the board of CPJ, and you may have seen in the last week the new report, the latest report has come out on journalist deaths. In 2025, more journalists and media workers were killed than in any other year since CPJ began collecting data more than 3 decades ago. The number is 129, and that's even quite a conservative estimate because it doesn't include some situations which may in fact be targeted killings of journalists, but where that hasn't yet been verified. So 129 is a conservative estimate. So that's essentially a journalist every 3 days. So over the course of this conference, there will be another journalist killed on those statistics. And critically, 2 out of every 3 journalist killings globally last year were committed by one country, by Israel. And I did feel it was impossible to have this discussion without referring to that. Please do take a look at the report. And then finally, I wanted to refer, and I'm just going to take out a note just to make sure I get the wording exactly right here. You may not know who the man on the right is. You may know who the woman on the left is. The woman on the left is Mary Colvin. And Mary Colvin, a brilliant, brave journalist who, of course, never stopped speaking truth to power, had a very serious injury as a result of her work, and then was, of course, killed because she was doing her job. At the time when she was killed, she was with Paul Conroy. Paul Conroy was a very close friend of hers and someone who was her photojournalist often. They often travelled together and did brilliant, brilliant work. And I see Rebecca at the back of the room. And I know Rebecca and others in the room know Paul and are friends with Paul. And I had the privilege of being on an advisory board at RSF with him for a period of time. And I just wanted to say 2 quick things about Paul. The first is he was incredibly funny. And the first time I met him, he told me this fantastic story about a film that had just been made about Mary Colvin. And for many years, people had said to him, would you give us your footage? Would you allow us to collaborate with you about a film about what happened to Mary Colvin when she was killed? And he was always resistant. And this particular filmmaker said to him, look, I've got the perfect actress to play your friend. And in walked Rosamund Pike. So willowy, beautiful Rosamund Pike, who didn't really seem to fit the kind of gritty Mary Colvin who he knew. And he was a little dubious. And then they said, we've worked out who's going to play you as well. It's going to be Jamie Dornan. And he did say, to my shame, I immediately thought, yeah, I can see it. And he was on board with the film. But it's a brilliant film and worth seeing. But he's an incredible person, and he actually died of natural causes this weekend. And I didn't want today to go past without mentioning him and without giving you all a little bit of homework, which is, if you get a moment, please do take a look at his final photo essay in Cuba, an example of someone who bore witness right till the very end. And it's on Byline Times, and I can send a link to anyone who wants it afterwards. It's called Paul Conroy's Last Photo Essay, Cuba's Moment of Reckoning. And what he said was, as soon as he saw Maduro being bundled by Trump's snatch squad onto a rendition flight, he immediately thought, his eyes immediately went to Cuba, and he thought it was important to go and document what was happening in Cuba. And he said this, I was not about to sit that one out. I packed my loudest shirt, a pair of flip-flops, and took the next flight to Havana on a tourist visa. Havana almost never issues press visas. And you can read his words and you can see his photographs from the last piece of work that he did. So there are 3 examples of journalists who've continued to bear witness and to speak truth to power, despite being targeted by Caroline Leavitt in the White House, despite being targeted, and their media organizations either shut down, as happened in Guatemala and Hong Kong, or threatened with being shut down, as happened to Maria in the Philippines and Zia Ahmed Lobeli in Georgia. And in Paul's case, when he was almost killed, he never stopped documenting and doing his job. And it seems to me, if they can do it, we need to do it too. We need to shine a light on brave journalists doing their job against the odds and with terrible, terrible risks. And I hope today we can all think about ways in which we can support journalists in doing that work and ensure that we shine a light on their stories and we allow the journalist sometimes to become the story and to amplify their own work. Thank you.